So Deadlock is the latest title from Valve. It's currently in a closed alpha, which I have been a part of since about the start of June. Now that it's possible to speak about the game publicly, I thought I'd make a little video to talk about what I think about the game and share some of my initial learnings from it. I'll start by talking about what kind of game I think it is, give a quick overview of how, like a normal match might run, and then talk through the basics of the laning phase, the mid game, the late game, and then talking about items and heroes that I think are good generally or good for beginners. So what kind of game is Deadlock? So at its core, it's a MOBA. For those of you who are familiar, this is things like Dota 2, League of Legends, Heroes of the Storm, Paragon, Smite, those kind of games. As a Valve title, I think it's pretty normal to expect this, but there's a lot of mechanics that have been kind of brought along from Dota 2. So I'd say the key mechanics that they're bringing over are things like gold, CSing or last hitting, denying, which is in the game in a form, towers, Roshan style objective, and powerful items that people can buy for scaling. So it is still a first-person shooter, but it's got some differences from games like Overwatch or Valorant or something like that. I think aiming and shooting are obviously a very important part of this game, and the top players at the moment do seem to be people with shooter backgrounds, but it's not as critical as it is in a traditional shooter. So the reason for this is that time to kill is pretty high compared to, say, Counter-Strike, where if you tap someone a few times in the head, they just die. All the characters are very evasive because you have these rolls and jumps and dashes, and there is a lot of abilities that don't really care so much about your aiming or how you collect people and stuff like that. So that's kind of a quick little overview of it. Now, in terms of how a match might play out, you win by destroying the enemy's patron, which is in their base, at either kind of end of the map. There are 4 lanes, each one has a guardian, a walker, and then 2 base guardians in it. These are kind of like towers from Dota 2. In the base, on the left and right, there is a shrine, so 2 shrines. After you kill those, you can then kill their patron, which then becomes weakened, and then if you kill it in the weakened state, you win. There are 6 heroes on each team. At the moment, you just get automatically assigned a lane. It seems to be based on MMR, so it tries to put similarly skilled players against each other in lane. Every hero has 4 abilities, 3 kind of basic abilities, and 1 ultimate ability. You unlock these as you acquire souls, which is also the currency of the game, and you also acquire ability points by getting souls from a couple other things in the game, which you can use to upgrade your abilities. Every hero has a gun. Each hero's gun is unique to them, so they might have different damage per shots, fire rates, spread patterns. Some are shotguns, some are machine guns, different magazine sizes, things like that. So by default, you can buy 4 items each category. So there's the yellow category, which is items that enhance bullet-based things, green items, which enhance your vitality, and purple items that enhance your spirit. Now, you'll be able to see here on this replay, there's also 4 item slots to the right of your others that are locked. These are called flex slots, and you unlock these over time when your team takes certain objectives. And you can put any item in a type of item in a flex slot. So for example, if I already had 4 spirit items and I wanted to buy another one, I could put it in my flex slot. So that's kind of the basic overview of the game and all the sort of basic game pieces of how they work. Now I'm going to move into kind of more direct application of how to play the game at this point. So I'm going to start with laning. That's the kind of first, I would say, about 10 minutes of the game. So it's very important to push your lane. Pushing the lane in this game is very good. The reason it's good is because the way the terrain's set up, as you can see at the moment, each enemy's tower is up a set of stairs, and when you're down on the low ground, it's much harder for the enemies to shoot you, but still quite easy for you to shoot them. So you can harass them back away from their creeps and get more of the CS. Plus, you deal a lot of damage to them. Now, the other point is, compared to a game like Dota, the Guardians are not very strong. If you get right next to them, they do a melee attack, and that is quite a lot of damage. But in terms of just shooting, they don't kill the creeps very fast, and it's pretty easy to keep them off you. Now your goal in the laning phase is to get as much money as possible, and the best way to do this is by getting all the last hits. So CSing is, I would say, the key objective of your laning phase, with kind of killing enemy heroes and keeping them out of lanes is your secondary objective. So there's some key mechanical parts of the game that I think are important to note at this point. So for the first 10 minutes of a game, when you last hit a creep, that is, you or an allied hero in the lane kills them, you get half the gold or souls that it gives on death. The other half pops out in a little orb, and whoever shoots that, regardless of ally or enemy, gets that gold distributed to them and whatever allies are in the vicinity. What this means is you want to get the orbs, and if you don't, your enemies get some of the gold. Now, a good way to do this is by pushing them out by harass, but it's important that when you do that, you're also making sure you get all the last hits. If all you're doing is shooting your enemies, but they're still getting more last hits than you, they're winning the lane. Unless, of course, you're killing them like over and over and over. But that's very unlikely. Now, heroes with fast guns, like fast projectiles, tend to be better at this, or heroes with fast firing shotguns, because the orb, when it pops out, moves in a random direction, so you can just burst shoot it. This is a part of the game where obviously aiming is really important, and that's why I think a lot of FPS players are quite high ranked in this. So I expect over time people will get better at this. So in terms of making yourself strong in the laning phase, I recommend buying tier 1 items, probably 5 to 8 of them every game, and as soon as you can. Obviously don't like run back in the middle of a wave while your allies fighting someone just to buy an item, but you do want to spend that gold fast because the items make you more powerful, it lets you stay in lane longer, brawl more, get more of the creep kills faster, things like that. So it's important that you spend your gold rather than just keeping it on you. You know, if you think about it, if you've got, say, 3,000 net worth and your opponent has 1,500, but you've only bought one 500 gold item and they've bought 3, they're actually probably still stronger than you. So laning ends at about 10 minutes, it depends on the game or how it goes, probably a little bit earlier honestly, but we'll just say 10 for making things simple, and it helps me talk about some of the other key points that I want to make. In the mid game, after 10 minutes, creep last hits do no longer give any gold, and all the money is awarded to whoever gets the orbs that pop out of them. Of course, you automatically acquire the orbs from the creeps that you kill, but you know, if an enemy gets them, you won't get the money. Now, importantly as well, at this point, 10 minutes, the gold from the orb ceases to give its entire bounty to all heroes in its vicinity, and instead divides it between them. What this means in shorthand is that if you're farming a lane on your own, you're going to make a lot more money than if you're farming it with someone else in it with you. Therefore, I think that pushing lanes on your own, or with a small number of people, is a good way to farm in the mid-game. Now, you'll also be able to see in this replay there's lots of these arrows that are underlined, and these represent jungle camps that are around the map. The first jungle camp spawns at 2 minutes, I think. It's the easy camp, and then more spawn as time goes on. After a camp's killed, it respawns 4 minutes later. These are another way to get gold, and you want to supplement your income from lane creeps with jungle creeps where you can. Farming is very important for every character in this game. Unlike Dota 2 or League of Legends, there aren't really support characters in the traditional sense. The way gold is shared during laning phase means everyone comes out of it with money, and there's a lot of money on the map, and everyone wants to farm where they can. Obviously some heroes are better at it than others, do a bit more with it, but on the whole, no one should be not looking for farm. And I suggest you always take the mindset into the game that you need to be farming. The best way to farm in the mid game, I think, is try to farm those lane creeps in solo lanes and farm towards jungle camps. So, you know, if you can kill a camp and then run quickly over to the lane or vice versa, that will help you make gold fast. I also think it's important in the mid game that you farm towards shops. For a similar reason to buying items in lane, I think it's also good to buy your items in the mid game rather than holding lots of gold, because these let you farm faster, they make you stronger so you can take better fights or be more aggressive. So if you farm in a direction where you go towards the shops, you can avoid needing to go back to base to buy items or simply not buying them. Generally speaking as well, it's important to push your lanes out in the mid game because there are no wards in this game. The only source of vision is your creeps. And so when your lane's out, you kind of know more or less where the enemy heroes are, because they'll be behind the lines that your creep forms. They can get past them, but it's difficult to do so without being seen, so you can normally be pretty sure that they're more or less in that area. In terms of how you want to take fights in the mid game, I don't think it's good to take huge team fights or even fights. I think you want to prioritize fights where you have some kind of numbers advantage, or the enemy's recently wasted a bit cooldown, or if you're feeling strong, you know, go for a solo pick-off or a pick-off, say 2 people onto a hero that you catch. After the mid game, things naturally progress, you get into what I guess I'll call the late game. So I think this point begins at about the stage where most of the walkers or all of the walkers for one team is dead. Around here is when you want to start grouping up, because this is when you want to take bigger fights. Now it's still important to push lanes out, and there will still be solo play to do that, but you want to take a bigger emphasis on winning fights, because people are dead for longer and you're closer to their base, so whichever team wins fights can start taking some of the other big objectives. It's also really important at this point in the game to start thinking about mid-boss. Mid-boss is in the middle of the map. He's denoted by you know, kind of like an angel with an eye thing. He's a big weird serpentine monster thing. He's difficult to kill. You normally need most of your team to do it. And when he dies, he drops an item that provides a buff to all living heroes on the team that claims it. And what this buff does is cuts your respawn times in half. This is really useful because unlike in Dota 2, there's no buyback mechanic. There is an item you can buy that respawns you on death with a very long cooldown, but it's a pretty poor substitute. The reason this Rejuvenator is so useful is because, you know, for example, you can take an aggressive fight, trade evenly or, you know, even slightly negatively, but respawn so fast you can come back and kill the rest of the heroes, or take objectives, or just farm more of the map than that. So you still end up coming ahead, so it gives you a big safety net in that respect. Now, on the other hand, if you're fighting defensively, it's also really useful because, you know, if you die and they're in your base, you're probably just going to lose basically everything, if not the whole game. However, if you have the Rejuvenator, you can respawn faster, you might be able to like rally the fight, get the pick-offs that you need to begin your comeback, get your lanes out, that kind of thing. One thing I will note is that all the buildings in this game die pretty quickly. Since I've been in the beta, they've just put their HP up over and over and over, but they still die quite fast, especially if you have multiple heroes. Something that's also important to note is that the two side lanes, yellow and purple, the walkers in those lanes have less HP than they do in the middle lanes, so they're easier to push. I think at this point in the game, in the late game, it's pretty important that you save your speed boost on the zipline and use it for joining fights with your team or re-entering fights that you've died at the start of or beforehand. So now I'm going to move over to talking about itemization, my sort of philosophy on itemization, and items that I think are generally useful that you should be purchasing in most games. I think it's really important that you're filling almost every slot. Now, obviously, some characters don't really want to buy gun items or spirit items based on their abilities, so you might not be filling all of those slots, but you do want to make sure you're filling as many of your flight slots as you can. The reason for this is that each individual item has a higher impact per the money spent on it than a more expensive item. And so by accumulating the same network but with more small items, you're going to be more effective and have a bigger chance of winning fights, farming faster, and generally being successful. I would suggest instead of buying one tier 4 item if you have 6,000 gold, if you have empty slots, say, buy 1 tier 3 and 2 tier 2s or something like that.
No one outruns me.
I think it's also important that you learn what items in each categories help heroes, even if it's not their primary item. So earlier I talked about how, you know, you might not fill all your gun and spirit slots on certain heroes, but spirit damage heroes get quite a lot out of the gun item Soul Shredder Bullets or Pristine Emblem because they amplify spirit damage done, even though they're in the gun category. There are some items that I think are generally good on everyone. Every hero needs to buy some of the items. The spirit and bullet armors are good on basically everyone. Like I said, time to kill is high, people are pretty tanky, so you get a lot out of that extra resistance. Kind of similarly, because of this, lots of people are healing by lifesteal or by some hero's abilities, so the items Heal, Bane, Toxic Bullets, and Decay are pretty good on everyone because they reduce healing. There are also some items that anyone can buy in a game that calls for them. So these are Metal Skin. This functions like Ghost Scepter from Dota 2. It makes you invulnerable to physical damage for a short duration with a cooldown. Knockdown. What this does is it places a delayed stun on someone, so you click it on them and then after a while they get stunned and fall out of the sky. This is really useful against heroes that fly or have powerful channeled abilities, so Seven, Grey Talon, Vindicta, and Ivy. And then Ethereal Jaunt, or Ethereal Junction, not sure exactly what it's called. This is kind of like Metal Skin, except it makes you immune to everything. This can be good to kind of break up combo plays, or things like that. Now I'm also going to outline some heroes that I think are good for beginners. I guess the hero that I started with, I think is probably the easiest one to be successful on and learn the fundamentals of the game is Seven. Seven is kind of a hybrid spirit and physical damage character, which makes him a bit unique, but in terms of how he plays and what you buy, it's all pretty straightforward. His first ability, you shoot out a projectile that, when it collides with terrain or enemies, stops and does damage to everyone who stands in it. His second ability is basically like the knockdown item, you put a delayed stun on top of them. And then his third ability makes his attacks do lightning spirit damage that bounces between enemies. And his ult, he jumps up and channels a huge AoE damage that strikes all the enemies within line of sight of him. He's pretty easy to play, his abilities are easy to hit, he has a stun so you can reliably get your damage off after they get stunned. I suggest personally building him not all in on his ultimate, which some people do, because buying items that make him a better clicker with a third ability also do still help your ult, and it just means you're not so dependent on that ult, which has a very long cooldown. So another hero that I think is good for beginners is Abrams.
Definitely going up.
Abrams is a kind of tanky, more focused on fighting, I would say, than Seven, but still good at farming. Personally, I haven't played a lot of him, but he has a stun that's easy to land. He has a passive that passively heals him, which is strong, and his ult is a AoE stun as well. I suggest building him as a kind of tanky brawler. You want to buy mostly bullet items, though the melee enhancing items are also very good on him. I will say, this probably won't happen in your first games, but there is a parry mechanic, and so it's good to get into the habit of mixing up your melees. So on occasion, fully charging it, sometimes charging it shorter, just so it's less likely that your enemies parry. Also, you know, you can just shoot people if you have ammo as well, then you don't have to worry about the possibility of parrying you. Now the last hero that I think is good for beginners is the one I'm playing in this replay here, which is Infernus. His abilities are similarly pretty straightforward, easy to hit. He's kind of got a balance of farming and fighting. He can do both pretty well. I wouldn't say he excels at farming or fighting, but you know, he's good at both. His first ability is an AoE that you throw out. All the enemies that it hits, Infernus deals bonus damage to with everything. His clicks and his other abilities. His second ability, he dashes forward, leaving a fiery trail. All enemies that are hit by it take damage over time for the duration. His third ability is a passive. As you click people, you build up a debuff on them, and when it fills up, they take a damage over time. You can reset the damage over time by dealing more damage to them with your gun. And his ult is a big AoE stun that activates after a delay from when you press it. So it's kind of like Ravage from Dota 2 if you had to charge it up a bit first. Now, how I suggest playing Infernus is maxing your second ability. This is because it's your highest damage skill. You can use it to push out waves, and when you max it, its cooldown goes down significantly. From there, I don't think it really matters too much what you skill. I normally put 1 point into the ultimate because its cooldown goes down, and then decide whether I want to max the first or the third depending on the game. This is my kind of initial thoughts and introductory points on the game. Depending on reception, I might make more stuff like this. Who knows? Thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe.